Hey Brad, how does this sound for everybody? Like decent?
That's the size good.
This is as high as it goes. Gary here? Gary Robinson, anywhere?
Decent. I'm going to try and be as... Guys, my name is Brian Andreka. I run Kansas Angling Experience Guide out of Lawrence, Crappie County, and I'm right at the time. I guess talking people out during the spawn, but try not to drone on for too terribly long. Although I've been known to do that and get really good at it. So if you guys have any questions, let's try and hold them till the end. We'll do a question and answer, and then once everybody kind of gets up, I'll hang out here for a little bit, and you can ask me another question if you want. So biggest thing, like I said, with winter, this is my favorite time to catch crappie. It's obviously really tough for a lot of guys to not winterize their boat, you know, when it gets cold like this, but being a 12-month operation for me, I'm guiding every weekend, no matter, you know, if it's 100 degrees or if it's 5 degrees, I'm probably going to be out there. But the biggest thing with these crappie in the wintertime is that their location and how to catch them is extremely predictable. So like I said, we're going to go over location, what to look for, obviously lower fishing pressure. This is kind of like, I guess, a no type thing because, yes, you're going to see a lot less boats out there, but winter crappie fishing in Kansas, there's obviously no secret that it's on fire. So you will see a lot less boats, but there's still going to be kind of a lot of boats out there, especially if you get anything over 35, 40 degrees. The fish are really hungry. This is when these fish just stack up on brush. And I mean, when I clean crappie for clients on a regular basis, I smell shad more than I actually smell the crappie when I'm cleaning, because their bellies are just chock full of shad. So they're hungry. It's a perfect time for them to eat. But also, like I said before, dialing in your electronics, this is a really good time to do it. So that's what we're going to go over. Biggest thing with location, make it really simple in the wintertime. Brush piles, channel breaks, brush piles on channel breaks, bridge pillars, pretty much anything that those fish can get on, they're going to get on. I primarily stick to brush piles. I've learned so much about fishing big lakes as far as learning contour lines, river channels, how to find that brush. You know, more recently, like literally within the past 7 or 8 years that I've really been able to dial this in. But this is where location and how to find these fish is a lot easier right now as opposed to, say, like in March, early April, when those fish will get off the structure and then they're just roaming around getting ready for the spawn. So that's why I guess, like I said, multi and always staying on different bites. This is primarily what I'm on in the wintertime. It's very predictable with those fish. You can, as long as you have a scan, that was always a challenge for me, was learning how to read my side scan. I'm still learning when it comes to side scan, but if you go to a lake that you've never been to before, or a lake that you're familiar with, and you're looking for brush piles that are away from a bunch of other boats, that's where you do have to utilize your side scan, because if you guys don't know what side scan is, that literally allows you to look anywhere up to 150 feet left and right of your boat. So when you put that in perspective, you're covering 300 feet in just one pass. Obviously, 150 feet, you're not going to be able to see as much. You'll be able to see little blips, but that's where you really have to dial in what you're looking at. You can go back to it, adjust the range, so on and so forth. That's a whole other thing we'll get into. Utilizing your 2D sonar or traditional sonar in your down scan, that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today is down scan, and more importantly 2D sonar, because even somebody like myself, I've always ran Garmin electronics. I do not have the most up-to-date like transducer like the Panoptics and LiveScope. Not one, because it's a little out of my price range, and it's out of a lot of people's price ranges, and that's why when I have clients on the boat, I try and teach them as a budget fisherman how they can utilize the same technology and still be just as successful. So here, I hope that looks good on this TV. That's a perfect side scan right there of a brush pile off to the left side, I would say. Just about 50 feet to the left. When it looks like that, it is really easy to pick out, you know, when you're on a big flat like that and then you see something. You're always looking at your shadows. That's the biggest thing with side scan that I found is learning how to read the shadows on the side scan. So as soon as I see that, I'm going to take my cursor over to that brush pile and drop a waypoint on it, and then go back to it and look and see what it looks like on the down scan and the 2D sonar. Because that tree looks really good, but if I go over it with down scan and I don't see any, you know, Christmas ornaments like I like to call them, I'm probably not going to fish that tree. But at least you utilize your sonar to find that, eliminate that water, go on to the next one.
Is that on the boat, back to the boat? Because that's got to be the back to the boat.
So that's one thing, like I said, if you're not familiar with side scan, you're really only using side scan mounted on your transom because that's stationary. If you had side scan on your trolling motor, it kind of works like Panoptics where as soon as you turn your trolling motor, that's going to adjust the view of where you're looking at. So when I'm side scanning, I'm at my console driving around, and this is what, 91 feet to the left and 91 feet to the right, and you can see that circle there, that brush pile is about 50 feet to the left. So always in the back of the boat. Here's another side scan. This is just out the deep channel on either side, 39 feet of water. I mean, it looks like a forest down there. You're always looking, it looks weird because you're looking from the side, those trees, you know, this is all, it's so much easier when we're actually fishing. This is all the water. That's the water column right there. This is the bottom. And then all those trees sticking up right there, that's what we're looking at. Because that's shooting from the side, you're not going to obviously see those like it was if you had down scanning and you were looking right below the boat. This is all from the side. So that's just, like I said, somewhere right in the middle of the channel looking on either side. They make it pretty obvious, especially on a brush pile like more of a stick-up tree. There's not a lot of branches, but you can individually count the number of the fish and even really see the size of the fish when you're looking at that. So again, this is down scan on my Garmin, my EchoMap 93 SP Plus, looking straight down in the back of the boat. Same thing here. You can barely see the brush pile because there are so many fish up. I mean, it's almost like cheating at that point. So when I'm running around and scanning my brush piles, I'm looking at my down scan so I can see if those brush piles look good enough to fish. But like I said, when you see brush that looks like that, I would have jigs in the water so fast. But that's what they should look like in the wintertime. That's why they're so easy and so predictable. You know, like Kirby fishes a lot of lakes where he'll fish big bridge pilings, you know, set up right next to him like at Lacine or Hillsdale. They may not have to be on brush, but as long as they can get on something, that's where they're going to be. So at Clinton Lake, a lot of what I fish is on main river channels or any big brush pile. It's just, it's a really fun way to do it. So this is another thing too, if you guys can see there. They make it really easy in that picture, but you're looking for that separation in between the fish. If you see a big blob, it may very well be shad. But as long as you can see the separation, then you know you're looking at a school of crappie or white bass, whitefish, so on and so forth. Here's just a couple more pictures that I've taken. Again, it's kind of hard to actually see the tree in these pictures, but like there's one right there where you can barely see the tree because there's so many crappie piled in there. Same thing over here on a channel edge. There's not even really any brush right there. That's just another place where you're going to find those crappie in the wintertime when they're holding on that ledge like that. And I mean, that's a school of like 100 to 200 crappie. So it doesn't really make it fair sometimes. So when it comes to dialing in your electronics, this is something that, like I said, during the wintertime is huge. Learning how to read your 2D sonar, because what I do, like on those screenshots that you saw before with the down scan, is I'm picking out those brush piles to what I want to fish. But when I go up front to actually fish, I'm not using down scan in the front of the boat. I'm just using my built-in transducer on my Minn Kota and using 2D sonar. Because I've already gone over that brush pile, I know that there's fish there. So then when I go to the front of the boat, I don't need to see those fish. I can use my 2D sonar. You can adjust your sensitivity, your contrast, your sharpness, scroll speed, color palettes are huge. I really like you saw on those screenshots. I really like the blue color palette on a Garmin. You're going to be able to pick out a lot of different things depending on the different color. I like green, the traditional The biggest thing that you always want to look for on your graph is adjusting your kilohertz or KHC or however it shows. Those graphs anymore, especially with chirp technology, come preloaded with 455 kilohertz and 800 kilohertz. So when you're talking about those two things, you're looking at coverage area. So with 455 kilohertz, you're going to have more of a coverage area than you would with 800. So when you set it to 455, I can comfortably set that out to 100 feet and see things. They're not going to be as detailed, but I'm going to get more of a coverage area. Where if I have it running at 800 kilohertz on side scan, it's going to show me things more in detail. So when you're actually scanning around looking for brush, start with 455, dial in where you found that brush, throw a waypoint down, then switch it back to 800, get closer to that waypoint, and then you can see a lot more detail. With that being said, the rule of thumb that you pretty much have to live by with that, so if the water's 20 feet deep, you set your range to 60. You want it roughly 3 times the depth that you're fishing. So if it's 20 feet deep, your range is 60. If it's 30 feet deep, your range is 90, and so on and so forth. So that's always a really good rule of thumb to follow when it comes to stuff like that. And this is all stuff that I've learned fairly recently. I'm not an expert when it comes to electronics. I'm constantly learning and constantly learning. But it's these little things right here. As long as you don't necessarily overthink that and just use those small rules of thumb, it's going to help you a lot in the long run. Because you can really, truly overthink your electronics, and it will affect your fishing. Because I've been there. I'm the king of overthinking everything. And as soon as you just dumb it down and simplify things, that's when you're going to be more successful. So I know that's kind of a lot of information to ingest, but I just see so many guys that get stuck on actually not looking at their kilohertz, what they're running, if it's 455, if it's 800. You have to know what that stuff means, and that's going to help you dial in your electronics a lot more. In the 455 and 800, that's not just for side scan. That's also for down scan. Because forever, like when Garmin first went chirp, and they had chirp technology came out, I thought it was great. And I was running 800 kilohertz for everything, and I'm like, this is great, until I learned what 455 versus 800 means, and then I started switching around. So, like right now, I pretty much just leave mine at 455 and go from there. So, kind of transitioning from your electronics to bait selection. I'm not really one of those guys that really likes those long 10 to 12 to 14 foot rods. It's really good when it comes to if you're dipping trees, like in the summertime. I don't really do that very much, but when I'm fishing in the front of my boat and I'm fishing right below the trolling motor, I want a shorter rod. So I'm primarily using, I like a 6'6" rod. You can use 6'3". That's like your traditional like walleye jigging rod like me I love. If I'm right over the side and I have to stay vertical, it's a short rod. Because if anybody's seen any of my recent videos that I've done on my YouTube channel lately, I got a really good one the other day. I've actually video game fishing those fish up out of the brush pile where I can see my jigs go down, watch the fish come up and hit it, and watch me reel it in. And you wouldn't be able to do that if you had a 10 or 14 foot rod because you'd be set up off of the brush. But when I'm fishing vertically right below my trolling motor, that's where I want that to be. So I like a shorter rod. I'm not really one for ultralight rods. I know it's really fun to catch those fish on ultralight rods, but I need something just a little bit stiffer because a lot of times if you have an ultralight or a light, you may not even feel that bite. So I like medium light, 6'6" medium light, right middle of the rod, middle of the road rod. As far as your line selection, when it comes to crappie fishing, I've always been a braid guy. When I first started out using braid, I was just using 5 or 6 pound Power Pro braid or Bass Pro Hyper braid or whatever. Real light stuff. Crappie are not braid sharp. That's one thing that I think a lot of people have a big misconception about, is that maybe in the wintertime when the water's clear, if it's calm and still, those fish can see the line. They're not concerned about the line. If it is yellow, I like white. I like being able to see my line because when I'm fishing right next to the trolling motor and the transducer, I know that there's a lot of my clients that have been guilty of it. It doesn't take much for that line to go right into the crotch. So I like to see exactly where my line is. I'm also a big line watcher when it comes to if you get a bite, you may not feel that, but if you see your line jump, it's going to be tough to do that with moss green, the green braid. So I like high vis stuff. With that being said, you can run braid crappie jigging like this all the way up to 20 pounds. Like I said, the fish are not braid shy. they're not going to see it. But if you get hung up and you have the right hook on there, you're not going to break that off. It's going to bend those hooks out, and you're going to be able to save the jigs. So you can run it all the way up to 20 pound. The line diameter is still super small. I forget what the exact diameter of 20-pound braid is, but I'm pretty sure it's somewhere around 6 to 8 pound monofilament diameter. So it is super thin. Moreover, it's really sensitive. I mean, you can feel a fish fart on the line. Braid is so sensitive, especially in the wintertime. Feel those light bites. I think it's great. I like a 1,000 size spinning reel. I like the smaller ones. On some of my client rods, I do have 2,000s, which is fine. But it's just really how your rod is balanced. I like a good balanced rod. I wouldn't put a 3,000 size spinning reel on a 6'6" rod. It's going to feel really weird. So. But as far as your jigs go, 1/8 ounces. I use 2 jigs. Like I said, if you've seen my videos, I run them in tandem. So 2 1/8 ounce jigs, about 12 to 16 inches apart. That helps you cover a lot of the water column too in the brush pile. So some days you may be able to dial in a pattern and say, these fish are hitting more on the top jig than they are at the bottom, and that's because they are situated in the brush too. And then like I've got a few times this year, you catch 2 at one time. That's always good. You can adjust your jig size as necessary too. I find the 2 1/8 ounce jigs is plenty, especially when you're fishing in brush. Anything over that, if you do 2 1/4 ounce jigs, that's really heavy. It'll just sink right down. Be able to feel your jigs and keep them still. So, but if you're finding that maybe you want to try and weed out some of those smaller fish, I do like keeping one 3.5 inch plastic tied on, just one. But it's like I was telling a couple guys earlier, a 6-inch crappie is still going to eat a 3.5 inch bait, and vice versa. A 16-inch crappie is going to eat a 2-inch bait. So you can try and play around and experiment, but right now, this time of the year, all the shad that we're seeing are just about that 3.5 inch size. So match the hatch. Because like I said, when I'm cleaning crappie, that's all I see in the belly is shad, just digested shad, and they're all about that size. So. But as far as colors go, I mean, like I said, you'll see in my box here, I've got just about every one. I have my go-tos that I really like, but you don't have to have a supernatural color. Maybe on some days they may be more finicky, especially if you're fishing along a bank. It's got 30 boats on brush piles. They may have seen every color. Try something different. Go natural, try something different. Go bigger, go smaller. It's all about experimentation.
Are you using any eggs?
Any what?
The yellow eggs?
Crappie nibbles? No, I do not use crappie nibbles.
It's like all
the last time that I had crappie nibbles in my boat, they were snuck on by a client. The next thing I knew, I looked up on my front deck and they were dropped and stepped on all over the front deck. So I don't use crappie. I don't really think that, I mean, some days I feel like they may play to some advantage. I'm not saying I'm too good for them, but I don't use minnows that often, especially this time of year, and I don't necessarily use crappie nibbles. But, I mean, there's something for everybody.
Some guys are like,
I know. There are plenty of guys that swear by them. Like I said, I'm not saying I'm too good for them. I just don't. So the technique, this is the biggest thing that I think a lot of people don't really know if they've never winter crappie fished before. There's nothing to the technique of winter crappie fishing. The water's cold, those fish are lethargic. You may come upon a lot of different schools of fish that are really aggressive because, like I've said 1,000 times, if you've seen a couple of my recent YouTube videos, it's almost like I have live scope in the front of the boat where if I'm on a school of aggressive fish, I'll have my jigs 2 or 3 feet above the brush pile, and I'm watching those fish race up to my jigs, which traditionally in the wintertime is kind of weird because those fish are lethargic. They're literally just like they are in this brush pile here, where they just sit there. So when it comes to the technique, you get your jigs down to the brush. I usually start right at the top of the brush pile, like where I can see my jigs before I sink them 6 feet down into the brush. You let them sit there. It's just a dead stick technique. The plastics that I use, especially with the stinger tails, the real thin stinger tails, it takes the water pressure alone is enough to move those tails to give you the action that you need. But there's no, like me, I'm kind of a spaz when it comes to fishing a jigging wrap. It's so hard for me to transition from fall jigging wrap fishing to winter crappie fishing because I'm just like this. And that's literally the technique. And those fish, especially when they're hot and aggressive, traditionally maybe a lot of smaller fish, you will feel that fun. Like crappie guys always say, I love the fun. And that's exactly what it is. But that being said, I was talking to Kim Burnett about this earlier. A lot of those bigger fish, you'll never feel them bite. So every, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes, I'll slowly lift up real quick because there may be a fish on that whole time and you'll never know. Crappie's eyes are positioned on the top of their head and they're always pretty much looking up. So you're never going to have really a fish that goes down for it. They just slowly come up, grab it, you may never feel it. So keep it a little active, but that activity is not to entice a bite necessarily, because there will be days where if those fish are lethargic and not active, I'll tell people, just give them a couple little pops every now and again. Try and get a reaction struck up. That or when you're dropping your jigs down, those fish will hit on the way down. You go to pick up your slack and you've already got a fish out. So just experiment. But like I said, right now the water temp, I'd say it's probably pushing 33.5 to 34 degrees. I was there on Wednesday and it was 34.5, 35. They're cold. Those fish are cold. So it's a dead stick technique. It's like I always tell people, it's not the most fun or exciting when you're waiting for it, but when those fish get going, it is fun. So just keep them still. On the whole, that I can tell as when it comes to crappie fishing in general, when you're looking for pods of back, maybe I do clients, it's all not active, but I always tell people there's always fish eating somewhere. So I always use my dad as a prime example. He goes to my waypoints that I give him expecting fish, and then he sits there for 3 hours and he's sad and upset because he got skunked. And why is that? Because he didn't move. It's easy to go and crack a beer and fish and sit on a waypoint, but if those fish are not eating, it's time to go. So stay mobile. The smallest details matter. You really have to be precise. What a lot of guys do when they're brush pile fishing, if I know if I'm sitting in 20 feet of water and that brush comes up to, I don't know, 8 to 10 foot, and you get that jig down there and you start to feel the brush, a lot of guys will keep like a little Sharpie in their pocket or like a slip bobber thing on their line, and then you can catch a fish and then drop that jig down exactly to where that was based on that bobber stop or that little Sharpie mark on your line. Me, I like to just count, like if I use a 6'6" rod, I just do like 3 sweeps of the line as it's sinking, close my veil, and then let it sit. I can always pull out line if I need to, but you really have to be precise. It's just like putting any other fishing pattern together, colors, size, depth, so on and so forth. You just really have to pay attention to those small details. Cannot be lazy. Fishing in a crowd is a lot of community holes, and I mean, even though there's not 2 guys fishing one brush pile, if you get 20 boats on a shoreline, those fish can feel the pressure. Go find your own stuff. That's why I try and teach my clients, especially in the wintertime, how to read your electronics, especially if they fish, so they can go out, throw on their side scan, and go find their own brush piles. I'm not saying they're going to be some super secret brush pile, but a lot of what I'm fishing right now is all in the main lake, and everybody that I see fishing is right up against the bank. I don't like fishing by people if I don't have to, especially when the wipers are going, but you learn so much more on the tough days that you have by yourself when you go out and just learn stuff than just go, having to catch fish and go and sit on the same brush piles that have been beat up for, 3 days. So,
what's your thoughts on the fish feeling that pressure? You said earlier.
The fish do feel the pressure. I mean, they're not stupid. It may be different if the wind is blowing that day or if there's chop, but between everybody's graphs on, a bow graph, a console graph, everybody's got their trolling motors on spot lock, there's buoys out everywhere. I mean, the fish aren't that bad. They're kind of dumb, but they're not that bad. And again, lastly, learning your electronics. Nothing can replace time on the water, so it's just about getting out there and learning it. I love so much that I don't necessarily need to have live scope on my boat to be able to video game fish those fish up out of fun, being able to dial that in. There's always, if you have the budget for the live scope and pen optics, absolutely go for it. But if you don't, like me, you can still do almost the same thing with simple traditional 2D sonar on the front. My goal is always to make the most budget, and if that's where your budget lies, then you're going to learn a lot. So that's about all I've got for today. What's that?
Any specifics you got your 2D as far as seeing your baits?
So as far as 2D sonar goes, like you can adjust the same, like my Garmin that I have in the front is an Echo Map. It's an older Echo Map. It's like 3 or 4 years old. It's not the touchscreen one, but it's not chirp. So you're looking at a 200 kilohertz setting or a 77 kilohertz setting. And obviously in the front and the back, you don't want to have them running on the same frequency because you're going to get interference. So my front graph is running 200 kilohertz. I don't use downscan on it. I just have my map. Garmin makes it so easy to turn on the unit and start using it. There's no contrast, sensitivity, gain, so on and so forth. You can grow your Garmin on auto medium and just start fishing and see everything. That's what I think everybody on my boat seems to think I have. They'll message me on Facebook and say, what's your contrast set at? Or what's this set at? I literally am not lying to anybody when I say it's just on auto medium. And that's why Garmin rules, and they make it so easy for a guy that's not technologically advanced in that sense to be able to turn it on, learn it, fish, and be successful. So, but you can play around with it a little bit, but as soon as you start playing around with those settings like that, it's so easy to start overthinking and say, where was I before? I don't remember what my setting was, or if something happens.
So if you looked up on Garmin's auto, will you probably tell you the settings that it's set up?
Yeah, well, that's why they make it so easy. Is it's auto medium, auto low, high. I mean, I suppose that you probably could. I can't speak for Humminbird or Lowrance or anything like that because, like I said, I've literally always ran Garmin. But there's something for everybody. It's all personal preference. I just love Garmin because they're local. I've got a lot of great support behind them, and I've been able to really learn it. So it is very user-friendly. So now I guess we'll open it up to questions. If you guys have any questions about any of these baits or anything that I've talked about, because I know I can talk kind of fast and throw a lot of information at you at once. So, no question.
You were so good.
Yeah, I gave it too much information. So, but like I said, I'll be hanging out here for a little bit. Just for this event, right now I am offering 10% off all trips booked at this event when you put a deposit down. So no matter if it's next week or if it's over the summertime, you're guaranteed that 10% off. I do have some of the crappie baits up here that I use. If you guys want to know more about that, there's some stickers up here. We are doing a live stream on Facebook and YouTube, so that's kind of cool also. But the fishing has been great. The crappie fishing has been amazing. If you guys haven't seen any of my YouTube videos, you can go check out my channel. I've done quite a bit lately. It's been really fun. Kirby's also got a YouTube channel and put out a lot of live scope and optics videos. If you guys are interested in looking at that, I know there's probably a lot flooding on YouTube right now, but it's cool when you can see somebody local using it on how they use it on lakes like Hillsdale or Lacine or what have you. So,
what kind of water temperature do you think before they kind of break?
Well, like I said, when it comes to when those fish get off of structure, I only really guide for crappie this hardcore until like the end of February, because March can be traditionally tougher. They get off that structure and they scatter off onto the main lake to feed and get ready for the spawn. So sometimes it makes it really hard to get on those fish, but with technology like Panoptics and Live Scope, when you're able to look forward, live action right in front and everywhere, it may make it really easy to do that. I think it has a lot to do with both. I would say if I had to guess, somewhere around 50 to 45 to 50 degrees. Kirby probably knows more about that because he fishes for them year-round, whether they're biting good or not, as far as what water temp is when they scatter off the brush. But I know when I start fishing them, we got on them real good right after Thanksgiving, and the water temp was right about 40 and they were in the brush. So.
They say sharks or the shad will start spawning twice a day once it hits 64 degrees. I mean, everybody's got their thoughts. Right. I'm sure that's something that
yeah. Anybody else have any other questions?
What makes you choose the blue and the one that you change the colors from summer to winter?
Not really. The color palette, Gary asked, do I change the color palette on my Garmin? It really just kind of depends on what I'm looking for, honestly, because You can change it, like I said, from amber, which is what the Garmin's default to, which is kind of like an orangish, yellowish color, versus green versus blue. I like personally when I'm side scanning, I can see detail on structure and shadows a lot better. And the contrast is a lot higher with like the yellow or the amber. Whereas if I'm using down scan and it's just, I'm looking up and down, I like that blue and that green because I can pick those fish out a little bit easier. But inevitably it's all personal preference and I can't tell you which one's the best, but I can tell you which ones to start with and see what you like and then vary.
Run live. Do any adjustments on your electronics as far as more detail, as far as seeing a separation, I guess?
No, so like when I'm lost, I want or bass, whiteboard, but with walleye, when I'm looking for fish, I'm not really paying so much attention to my downscan. One thing that you can do, and it's really tough to do it on the lakes that I fish for walleye because you have so many wipers and white bass, but you can side scan those fish. Those walleyes will roam around in pods, and it's almost easier to, this is how they do it like up north on the Rainy River in April. They'll side scan, mark those pods of fish, and pass right to those fish. So it's almost like using live scope. But that being said, it may be a school of wipers, it may be a school of white bass, but when I have seen them on my 2D and traditional sonar and downscan, you're always looking for separation. Like even if the walleye is right on the bottom, it may just look like a rock. But if there's just that tiniest bit of separation, that's where your downscan comes in. Because when I teach people about using their electronics, they're always asking, what's better? What should I use more, downscan or 2D sonar? You have to use both. It's all interpretation. You're interpreting what you're seeing on 2D or traditional sonar to the downscan. So if you see like a little lump on your traditional sonar on the bottom, and then you look at your downscan, and you see that there is a little bit of separation between that and the bottom, you know it's a fish. It's not a floating rock. But if you were just looking at your traditional sonar, you would never be able to tell. So, but I couldn't tell you if that was a walleye or if that was a drum or a catfish.
No, like, I'm sure most guys like to go up north where you fish lakes and they said walleye in northern and
right. Yeah, and that's kind of the big difference between that and where we fish, and especially like on Clinton, where if I'm scanning around, the walleye sometimes have a hard time competing with the wipers and the white bass because it's so much more aggressive. So,
but like you're looking on that side scan, you showed us anywhere between 50 or 75 foot away from. How are you figuring out how deep those fish are? Because obviously, like you said, you deep trout.
Right, and you'll never know. I mean, you're getting a depth reading from what's right below your boat. So it all depends. You have to look at your map. Like if you're on a road bed and you're scanning 100 feet to the left and to the right, and you're marking fish that are 70 feet that way, but if you look at your map, that may be the break of the road bed or the channel, so you just don't know.
You're looking at the lake map.
And then mark a waypoint on those fish, then go over to that waypoint and then dial it in a little bit.
That actual waypoint's about as good a waypoint as you can get.
Right.
That is actually on that fish, but a lot of times they're waypoints.
Yeah, you just get in the area and then you can dial everything in from there. But then, here again, that's where this conversation that we're having right now is all based upon a non-live scope or Panoptics Garmin unit. You know, that is a whole nother realm, and I'm sure in Kirby's seminar he talked about that because he's been running Panoptics for a while, and now recently with live scope. I'm not there.